studio lights were bright. The cameras were rolling, and millions of people were watching from their homes. It was supposed to be another entertaining night on live television. The audience had gathered expecting laughter, jokes, and maybe a little drama. After all, the host of the show was famous for one thing: mocking his guests and turning interviews into comedy. But tonight's guest wasn't just another celebrity. It was Muhammad Ali. As Ali walked onto the stage, the audience erupted into applause. Some people stood up, others cheered loudly. His reputation had already filled the room before he even said a word. Ali waved calmly, wearing a confident smile. His presence was powerful but relaxed, as if he had walked into hundreds of rooms like this before, and knew exactly what to expect. The host shook his hand, but there was something strange about his smile. It wasn't welcoming. It was challenging. The host turned to the audience and chuckled. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have the man who calls himself the greatest." A few people laughed. Ali sat down comfortably in his chair, crossing one leg over the other, completely unfazed. The host leaned back and looked at him carefully. "So tell me something, Ali," he said with a sarcastic grin. "Do you really believe all that talk? Or is it just part of the show?" The audience laughed again. The host continued. "I mean, we've all heard the poems. The bragging, the famous line, 'I am the greatest.'" He shrugged dramatically. "But honestly, aren't you just the loudest boxer we've ever seen?" A louder wave of laughter spread across the studio. The cameras zoomed in on Ali's face. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He simply leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together. The host thought he had won the moment. The audience expected Ali to respond with one of his usual bold, playful comebacks. But instead, Ali smiled slowly. Not an angry smile, not an embarrassed one. A calm, confident smile. Then he looked directly at the host and then at the audience. And when Muhammad Ali finally spoke, his voice was quiet but powerful. What he said next didn't just answer the host's joke. It silenced the entire studio. The studio buzzed with excitement that night. Rows of audience members filled every seat, whispering to each other, some holding small programs with the show's logo on them. The bright stage lights reflected off the polished floor, and the cameras quietly glided across their tracks, capturing every reaction in the room. This wasn't just another episode of the show. Tonight's guest was Muhammad Ali, the heavyweight champion who had become one of the most talked about figures in the world. To some, he was a hero. To others, he was controversial. But to everyone watching, he was impossible to ignore. The host, however, had built his reputation on something very different. He was known for his sharp humor and fearless style. Celebrities often walked onto his stage knowing they might become the target of his jokes. Sometimes the teasing was friendly. Other times it went a little too far. And tonight, the host seemed ready to test Ali. Ali sat comfortably in the guest chair, leaning slightly back, his posture relaxed. He wore a dark suit that fit perfectly, and his famous confident smile never left his face. He looked completely at ease. The host leaned forward toward his desk, shuffling a few papers dramatically as if preparing for a serious interview. But the slight smirk on his face told a different story. "You know, Ali," the host began, glancing toward the audience, "people around the world know you for two things." Ali raised an eyebrow slightly. The host continued, "One, you're a great boxer." The audience nodded and clapped lightly. "But two," the host said, pausing for effect, "you talk about it more than anyone in sports history." Laughter spread across the studio. The host pointed playfully at Ali. "I mean, every time we hear you speak, it's the same thing. I'm the greatest, I'm the greatest." He leaned back in his chair and shook his head as if amused. "Doesn't that ever get tiring?" The audience laughed again, louder this time. Ali didn't react right away. Instead, he calmly looked around the studio. His eyes moved from the audience to the cameras, and finally back to the host. There was no anger in his expression, only patience. The host mistook the silence as hesitation, so he pushed a little further. "You see, Ali," he said, folding his hands together, "a lot of people think confidence is a good thing." He leaned forward slightly. "But some people think what you do isn't confidence." He paused just long enough for the audience to lean in. "They think it's arrogance." A few audience members gasped quietly, surprised at how direct the comment was. Others laughed nervously. The host smiled, clearly pleased with the reaction he had created. "Well," he said, raising his eyebrows, "what do you say to that?" The cameras zoomed in on Ali's face again. The room slowly grew quieter. Ali adjusted his position in the chair, leaning forward slightly now. His hands rested calmly together, and he looked directly at the host. For a moment, it seemed like he might fire back with one of his famous witty lines, but something about his expression had changed. It wasn't playful anymore. It was thoughtful. Ali took a slow breath. Then he looked out toward the audience, scanning the faces of the people watching him closely. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't loud. It was steady, and what he was about to say would change the entire mood of the room. The studio had grown unusually quiet. Just seconds earlier, laughter had filled the room. The host's jokes had landed exactly the way he expected. The audience had followed his lead, chuckling at every jab directed toward Muhammad Ali. But now something had shifted. Ali leaned slightly forward in his chair, his hands loosely clasped together. His posture was calm, relaxed, the posture of a man who felt no need to rush his words. The host waited with a confident smile, convinced that whatever Ali said next would simply give him another opportunity to turn the moment into another joke. But Ali didn't rush. Instead, he slowly looked across the audience. Row after row of faces stared back at him, curious about what he would say next. Some people were smiling, expecting a funny comeback. Others leaned forward in their seats, sensing that something more serious might be coming. Finally, Ali turned his attention back to the host. His voice, when he spoke, was calm. "You say some people think I'm arrogant." Ali began. The host nodded quickly, almost proudly. "Well, that's what they say." Ali tilted his head slightly, considering the words. Then he smiled faintly. "You know something," he said. "A lot of people use the word arrogant when they hear someone speak with confidence." The room stayed silent. Ali continued. "But there's a difference between arrogance and belief." The host shifted in his chair slightly, still smiling but now listening more carefully. Ali raised one finger gently as if making a simple point. "Arrogance," he said, "is when someone says they're great, but can't prove it." A few audience members nodded slowly. "But confidence," Ali continued, "is when you know who you are because you've worked for it." His voice was still calm, but there was strength in every word. The host chuckled softly, trying to regain control of the moment. "Well, sure," he said, waving a hand lightly. "But don't you think constantly telling people you're the greatest sounds a little excessive?" A few scattered laughs came from the audience. Ali looked at the host for a moment, then leaned back slightly. "You see," Ali said, "when I first started saying I was the greatest, people laughed." He glanced around the room. Just like some people laughed tonight, the audience grew even quieter. Ali's eyes moved slowly across the crowd. "But the reason I said it wasn't because I wanted to brag." He paused briefly. "I said it because I believed it." The host raised an eyebrow. "And believing in yourself," Ali added, "is something the world tries very hard to stop you from doing." That line landed differently. Several people in the audience stopped smiling and started listening more carefully. Ali continued speaking, his voice steady. "When a young man says he believes in himself, people tell him to be quiet." He looked toward the host again. "They say he's too loud, too proud, too confident." Ali shook his head slightly. "But if that same man stays quiet and doubts himself." Ali spread his hands. Then suddenly everyone is comfortable. The room was completely silent now. The host shifted in his chair again, his confident grin slowly fading. Ali leaned forward once more, resting his elbows lightly on his knees. "You asked me if calling myself the greatest gets tiring," he said. The host nodded slowly. Ali smiled again, but this time the smile carried a quiet certainty. "No," he replied. The audience leaned closer. "Because every morning I wake up knowing something important." He paused long enough for the room to hang on the next sentence. "I trained harder than most people." Another pause. "I sacrificed more than most people." And then he added quietly, "And when you work that hard to become something, you don't whisper it." A few audience members began to clap softly. The host quickly jumped in, trying to steer the moment back toward humor. "But still," he said, forcing a light laugh, "don't you think some humility would help your reputation a little?" A few people chuckled nervously. Ali looked directly at him. His voice remained calm. "Humility doesn't mean pretending you're less than what you are." The room fell silent again. Ali leaned back in his chair. Then he said something that made the entire studio freeze. "True humility," he said slowly, "is knowing your worth and not being afraid to stand on it." For a moment, no one spoke. Not the host. Not the audience. The cameras continued rolling as the words hung in the air. And for the first time that night, the man who had been mocking Muhammad Ali had no joke ready. The balance of the conversation had just changed. The room was silent, dead silent. For a moment it felt like time itself had slowed down. Cameras continued to roll, capturing every reaction in the studio, but no one dared speak. The laughter that had filled the room just minutes ago was completely gone. The audience sat frozen in their seats, mouths slightly open, trying to process what they had just heard. Even the stage lights seemed dimmer, as if the energy in the room had shifted. The host, who had spent the entire show controlling the narrative, suddenly realized he was no longer in control. His confident grin had disappeared, replaced by a nervous twitch at the corner of his mouth. He shuffled in his chair, glanced down at his notes, and then back up at Ali, who now leaned back calmly, hands folded across his chest. Ali's presence was magnetic. It wasn't the bright lights or the cameras. It wasn't even the millions of people watching from home. It was him, the calm, composed, and confident aura of a man who had fought battles both in and out of the ring and always came out standing tall. A few audience members began whispering to one another, eyes wide. Did he really just say that? One woman asked quietly. Another man shook his head slowly as if trying to make sense of the words. Their whispers were hushed, but they carried weight. Everyone could feel it. The host tried to force a chuckle, attempting to salvage the moment. "Well, I guess that's one way to put it," he said, but the sound of his own voice felt hollow even to him. The words lacked authority, lacked humor, and lacked the energy they had carried just minutes ago. Ali had subtly taken over the room without raising his voice, without shouting, without threatening. The cameras captured a slow pan of the audience. Faces of all ages and backgrounds stared at Ali. Some were recording, holding their phones in the air. Others had their hands clasped together tightly, leaning forward. Even the production crew behind the cameras seemed mesmerized, forgetting the next cue they were supposed to give. Every single eye was on him. Ali paused for a moment, scanning the room again. His gaze lingered on the host, who was now sitting very still, unsure of how to respond. Ali's lips curled into the faintest smile, the kind of smile that carries confidence, calm, and quiet authority all at once. Then Ali spoke again, slower this time, emphasizing each word with deliberate care. "You see, it's easy to laugh at someone when you don't understand their journey. It's easy to doubt someone when you don't know their struggle. And it's easy to mock someone when you think they are powerless." The audience remained perfectly still. No one laughed. No one whispered. Every word seemed to resonate through the air, almost tangible in its weight. Ali continued, his voice low but firm. "I have fought many battles. Not just in the ring, but outside it. I have faced critics, doubters, and those who wanted to see me fail. And yet, I stand here today, not because I shouted the loudest, but because I worked the hardest. I fought with heart, with courage, and with respect for myself and others." The host's smile had completely vanished now. He had tried to corner Ali with humor, with arrogance, and with ridicule. But none of it worked. Ali had transformed the moment entirely, using words, presence, and sheer confidence to silence the studio in a way no one could challenge. Whispers began again, softly this time, but they weren't mocking words. They were murmurs of awe. "Whoa, incredible, is really the greatest." Even the host's voice trembled slightly as he said, almost involuntarily, I guess that's true." Ali nodded gently, as if acknowledging the statement without gloating. Then he leaned back in his chair, relaxed, letting the silence linger just a little longer. It was a silence filled not with tension, but with respect, awe, and realization. At that moment, everyone in the studio understood something important. Muhammad Ali's power wasn't just in his fists. It wasn't in his fame. It wasn't in the poems or the interviews. It was in his mind, his heart, and his presence. The cameras kept rolling, capturing the stunned faces of everyone present. This wasn't just a moment on television. It was a moment that would live in the memories of every single person in the studio for years to come. Ali's eyes scanned the room one last time. Then, slowly, he leaned back, smiled faintly, and said in a calm, measured tone, "True strength is knowing who you are, even when others doubt you." And with that, the studio remained silent for a few seconds longer, a silence that spoke louder than any applause or laughter ever could. The silence in the studio lingered for what felt like an eternity. Every eye was on Muhammad Ali. The host's usual confidence had vanished, replaced by a strange mixture of awe and uncertainty. Even the audience, initially eager to laugh and be entertained, now seemed hypnotized by Ali's calm authority. The host swallowed nervously and tried to regain control. "Well, I suppose that's one way to look at it," he said, forcing a weak laugh. His voice wavered, betraying the discomfort he felt. He glanced down at his notes, shuffled them nervously, and tried to think of another joke. But there was nothing. Ali had completely shifted the balance of power. Then Ali leaned forward slightly, his eyes scanning the audience once more. He spoke quietly, almost conversationally, but every word carried the weight of experience, struggle, and confidence. "You see," Ali began, "people often measure greatness by what they see on the surface. How loud you are, how flashy you seem, how much attention you get. But true greatness is silent. It's earned in private, in the hours when no one is watching, in the sacrifices you make that no one applauds." The audience sat mesmerized. A few people had their hands clasped together. Others had phones in their laps momentarily forgotten. Even the camera seemed to linger on Ali, as if capturing more than just his image, capturing his aura. The host cleared his throat, trying once more to regain a sense of control. Sure, but isn't some confidence, maybe a little too much? His words sounded small even to himself. Ali smiled faintly. Not the kind of smile that mocked, but the kind of smile that made people stop and think. Confidence isn't about showing off, he said. It's about knowing your worth, and sometimes, people laugh when they don't understand that worth. They doubt it. They try to tear it down. The host shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He could feel the weight of Ali's words pressing down on him, leaving him with no witty comeback, no sarcastic retort, nothing to regain control. The audience was with Ali now, hanging on every word. Ali paused for a moment, letting the silence fill the room. Then, as if sharing a secret, he leaned slightly toward the host and said, "You tried to mock me tonight. You thought it would be funny, thought it would get a reaction. But the truth is the man you were laughing at. He's the same man who has faced doubt, injustice, and ridicule all his life, and he's still standing." The audience gasped quietly. Even the crew behind the cameras stopped their movements, captivated by the clarity and honesty of Ali's words. Ali's eyes softened as he looked around the room. "And that's the lesson," he continued. "People may try to make you small. They may doubt you, mock you, or laugh at you. But if you know your worth, if you stay true to yourself, nothing can stop you." The host's face had turned pale. He tried to force a smile, but it faltered. He realized he had underestimated Ali, not just his strength, but his intellect, his patience, the quiet confidence that had defined him throughout his life. Ali leaned back in his chair, relaxed, giving the host a final, steady look. "I came here tonight not to fight words, but to show the truth. Respect isn't given because you are loud. It's earned because of who you are, even when no one is watching." The audience erupted into applause. It started softly, a few claps at first, then grew louder and louder until the entire studio was standing, cheering and clapping. Phones recorded the moment. Faces lit up with smiles, and even some tears appeared in the eyes of people who understood the gravity of what had just happened. The host tried to speak, but no words came out. He had been silenced by the sheer presence of greatness, by the wisdom of a man who had fought more battles outside the ring than most would ever face inside it. Ali smiled once more modestly as he acknowledged the applause. Then he stood up, straightened his suit, and waved to the audience. His calm authority had not only silenced the host, but had commanded the respect of everyone in the room. He turned, walking off the stage slowly, leaving behind a powerful silence. A silence that spoke louder than any applause, louder than any laughter, and louder than any joke the host had attempted. That night, millions watching at home saw more than just a television interview. They witnessed a man demonstrating that true strength isn't about being the loudest, the flashiest, or the most popular. It's about courage, confidence, humility, and integrity. And the host, he never forgot the night he tried to mock Muhammad Ali, only to realize that the man in front of him was not just a champion in the ring, but a champion in life itself. The applause in the studio had faded, leaving behind a quiet hum of awe. Muhammad Ali had left the stage, but his presence lingered like a heavy, invisible weight, one that could be felt in every corner of the room. Cameras continued to roll, but the energy was different now. It was no longer a show about jokes and mockery. It was a lesson in respect, humility, and courage. The host sat frozen at his desk, staring at the empty space where Ali had been moments before. His usual confidence, the swagger that had allowed him to mock countless celebrities, had completely vanished. For the first time in his career, he was speechless. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because there was nothing he could say that would match the truth Ali had just shared. Behind the scenes, the crew whispered to one another, "Did you hear that? Unbelievable." He didn't raise his voice once, and yet he dominated the room completely. Even the producers, who were usually focused on lighting, camera angles, and timing, nodded in silent approval. Everyone recognized the power Ali had displayed, the quiet, undeniable strength of character that commands respect without shouting, threatening, or showing off. The audience, still seated, looked around at each other with wide eyes. Some shook their heads in disbelief, some whispered quietly, and some simply stared, processing what they had witnessed. The room was full of people who had come expecting entertainment, but they had received something far greater, a masterclass in dignity and humility. Finally, the host found his voice, though it trembled slightly. I suppose," he stammered. "I suppose that's why people call you the greatest." His words were sincere, though awkward. There was no humor in them, no sarcasm, just honesty. Ali turned back briefly, looking at him with a gentle, knowing smile. "Not because I say it," he replied calmly. "Not because anyone else says it. Because I live it. Every day, every fight, every challenge. That's what makes a man great, the work he puts in, not the words he speaks." The host swallowed. He had expected to dominate this interview. He had expected to get a reaction that would make the audience laugh at Ali. Instead, he had been humbled, quietly, subtly, completely. And as he processed this, a strange sense of respect began to grow. He realized that tonight, Ali had taught him something that no joke, no clever comment, and no spotlight could have ever taught. Real strength and greatness come from integrity, courage, and humility. Meanwhile, the audience began to clap again. Slowly at first, as if testing whether it was safe to show their admiration, but then the applause grew louder, louder still, until it became a standing ovation. People cheered, whistled, and some even wiped tears from their eyes. For the first time, the room celebrated not just a man, but a principle, the power of character and quiet confidence. Ali gave a final nod to the crowd. "Thank you," he said simply. "Remember, respect isn't about wealth, fame, or strength. It's about treating others as they deserve, even when no one is watching. That's how we become truly great." As he exited the studio, the cameras followed him, capturing the calm, deliberate pace of a man who had just reminded the world of what greatness really looks like. Behind him, the host remained seated, reflecting on every word, every pause, every moment of Ali's speech. He knew he had been defeated, not in a physical sense, but in the way that mattered most: the mind, the heart, and the respect of everyone present. For the audience, the crew, and even the host, the night was unforgettable. Muhammad Ali hadn't just delivered a lesson to the live studio, he had delivered a message to millions watching at home. A message that would resonate for years. Confidence is earned through hard work, not words. Respect is shown to all, not just the famous or powerful. True greatness is quiet, patient, and unwavering, even in the face of mockery. By the time the cameras finally stopped rolling, Ali had already left the building. But the energy he left behind was electric, charged with admiration, awe, and inspiration. People continued talking about the moment long after the broadcast ended, sharing clips, quoting his words, and marveling at the quiet power he had displayed. Even the host, once eager to mock, couldn't shake the lesson. He realized that some battles aren't fought with words meant to humiliate. Some battles are fought with presence, integrity, and unwavering self-belief. And that night, everyone learned something invaluable: real strength is silent, and true respect is earned, not demanded. The studio had emptied. The cameras were off. But the impact of that night lingered like an invisible echo. People walked out slowly, talking in hushed voices, replaying Ali's words in their minds. Even hours later, viewers at home were still quoting the lines, sharing clips, and debating the calm, quiet power that Muhammad Ali had shown on live television. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. There was no shouting, no threats, no arrogance. His strength came from knowledge of himself, preparation, and unwavering confidence. He didn't need to dominate the room with jokes or loud words. His presence alone commanded respect. Ali had turned an attempted humiliation into a masterclass in character. The host had tried to mock him, to belittle him in front of millions. But Ali simply stood tall, both figuratively and literally. And in doing so, he showed the world a lesson that went far beyond boxing, beyond fame, beyond television. Respect, Ali demonstrated, isn't given automatically. It isn't handed out because someone has money, fame, or power. It's earned through integrity, humility, and consistency. And most importantly, it's shown to everyone, not just those you want to impress. Ali had also shown the subtle power of patience. He didn't rush. He didn't react immediately. He let the host speak, let the audience laugh, and allowed the situation to unfold naturally. Then, with calm and precision, he delivered his truth. The impact was instantaneous. Laughter turned to silence, silence turned to awe, and awe turned to admiration. That night was a reminder to everyone: the loudest voice in the room isn't always the strongest. Sometimes, strength is silent, measured by action, consistency, and the courage to stand by your principles. It's about knowing who you are, even when the world doubts you, mocks you, or tries to tear you down. And the host, he walked away changed. Not humiliated in a destructive way, but humbled in the way that inspires growth. He learned that mocking others rarely elevates anyone, and that recognizing true greatness, even in someone you intended to belittle, is a mark of character. Ali's calm demeanor also taught an audience lesson that's easy to forget in daily life: humility and confidence are not opposites. True humility doesn't mean diminishing your accomplishments. True confidence doesn't require boasting or intimidation. The two coexist in the way you carry yourself, the respect you show, and the integrity you uphold, especially when no one is watching. As people left that studio, many reflected on their own lives. How often do we let ego control us? How often do we mock, judge, or dismiss others before understanding their journey? Ali's example served as a mirror, one that forced everyone to consider their own actions and attitudes. For viewers at home, the lesson was clear: life will always present moments where you can react with arrogance, sarcasm, or disrespect. Or you can react with patience, integrity, and humility. Ali showed that the latter approach leaves a legacy far more powerful than any joke, insult, or loud declaration ever could. So, what is the moral? It's simple: respect everyone, even when no one is watching. Stand tall in your confidence, but remain humble in your approach. True greatness is quiet, enduring, and felt deeply by those around you. Type ALI in the comments if you believe in the power of humility and strength combined. And share where you're watching from, because every single one of you is part of this story, part of this lesson, and part of the movement to respect greatness when we see it. Muhammad Ali didn't just win fights in the ring. That night he won hearts, minds, and respect, and reminded the world that true power lies not in volume, but in the quiet certainty of knowing who you are.